Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live stream, where we are going to be looking at as much of the questions for the paper as possible. Now, as you can imagine, tonight we're going to be rushing through the topics as quick as we can. So I've got one eye on the chat. I'm not very good at keeping an eye on the chat, I'll be honest with you. But if you've got any questions, stick them in there, and I can bring them up. So, for instance, I can bring up comments just like that, just like in a real proper stream, and we can deal with it. And best stream, not by view numbers. I'm just going to say that. Right. Okay. Let's get started then. Let's jump over to my proper screen and have a look at what's going on with that. So he says very confidently. There we go. We've got that running now. And we can see what's going on. So the topics of the mock are in this order. And we're going to start very quickly with the questions from the practical paper. The first 4 questions come from a practical paper, and you have a context for it. So you will be given a page of information. And you remember in the past, we've had Life Farm, Milk Farm, we've had holidays, happy holes, things like that have allowed us to discuss and go into depth on ridiculous concepts. The first question, though, is this bad boy. Now, hopefully you remember the pattern from the 3 we've seen. You get 3 tables which are very, very similar, and your job is to produce an entity relationship diagram. Now, what that means, first of all, is, and I'm just going to put my pen on here, is we need to add some data to these tables. The first thing we do always is put a key field in. And the way I would always identify that is I put a little asterisk in, and at the bottom, I put a little asterisk and say key field. Now, again, apologies for the handwriting. I'm using a mouse like a Muppet. The key field for a customer table would just be customer ID. This handwriting is awful. This is like marking GCSE papers. And the bookings table would have a booking ID. Now, they're the key bits of information. They're the unique numbers for each table. So that's exactly what you'd have there if you wanted to reference a specific customer or a specific booking. Then we need to add at least 2 fields that are relevant to the customer and the booking. So, for instance, the customer, you might have first name. Beautiful. You might have surname. You might have telephone number, anything like that. You can put a couple in if you want, but you need a minimum of 2. Same for the booking table. So if we're booking a holiday, we're going to need a date, and we're going to need a time, maybe. Why not? Treat ourselves. The last thing you have to do then to your relationship diagram is identify which way it's linked. You have to think about which of these tables would be filled in first. Now, in this example, I imagine our list of caravans has been filled in for many years. And our list of customers was either just filled in or has been filled in for a while. And when I'm making my booking, I've got my drop-down menus inside my booking table, and I'm saying this customer for this caravan. And if that's the case, that's the order that we're going to put in our foreign keys. So we're going to put in customer ID there to link it to the customer table, and we're going to add caravan ID there to link it to the caravan table, and then bring down our links. So one customer can appear in the bookings table many times. One caravan can appear in the bookings table many times. You are essentially, after that point, just doing this design over and over again. Now, of course, they could ask you something different, but they really never have. So all you need to do is keep this idea in mind and just apply some thought process to how you're going through those stages. The second part is data dictionaries. And that's where we take those designs and we try and expand upon them so they're easy to replicate in an exam situation. The mark scheme is this. You need 2 different field names as well as the key field, 2 different data types, 2 different key fields, 2 field lengths, and there needs to be validation, at least 2 different types in each table. And there's your list of types. If you remember the types of validation, and validation is just checking that the data looks about right. It's the right kind of thing. It is valid data. That is a range check where we have a number between 2 values, a format check where it has to look a certain way, presence check where we check it's actually there, the length check to make sure that there's been a certain amount of letters being typed, and a lookup check, is it part of the list? Beautiful comments coming through, as you can see. Well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? That's all I'm saying. On to the example now. So this is, I'm only showing you the one because we've looked at these in ridiculous detail. We did 3 of these past papers. So hopefully you've got plenty of information of your own that you can use to develop this and work on this. But this is the example of the customer table. So remember, the marks are for a key field. So we've got a heading called key fields. Just a reminder, you don't get the headings in the exam. If you're going to remember anything, go and learn the headings of this table, because it is very, very, very easy to forget those headings and then be unable to do it. In your exam tomorrow, you'll just have blank pages for each of these first few questions, and you can write them down however you want, the best you can. So we need field name. That is the name of the piece of data we're holding. Notice things like first name are broken up. It's not just name, it's first name and surname. And we've tried to identify ones that can have some validation on there. Only one has the key field box filled in. Data types, we've got at least 2. A key field is always an integer. You've got strings then for your text and dates for your date. You've got, of course, floats if you want decimal numbers. Your field length, you only need to do it for strings, nothing else. So you could leave these integer ones and this date one blank if you wanted to. But a field length is how many letters you'd give it at maximum. You have to be sensible with that. And then finally, your validation. Now look how they write it. They give the name of the type of validation and then an example. So a lookup check should be Mr., Mrs., Miss, or anything else. That's what the ellipses means. Format check, letter, letter, number, number, space, number, letter, letter. That's what that means. Now, in all those cases, we are hitting that mark scheme. You need 2 of those for the 2 tables that you've just done in your entity relationship diagram, and you're in a good position. Moving on, I hope you managed to do this as quick as I'm talking about it tonight. Proposed methods. Now, this is the question everyone hates because, once again, you remember the pattern of the question. Yep, there's 2016, 17, and 18. You can imagine that the 2019 question paper, which, I mean, spoiler alert, that's what you're getting questions from, is going to look broadly similar to this. In fact, word for word the same. Select and fully justifies your proposed methods of solution for the 3 main requirements, or in that case, for the main requirements listed in the scenario. What that means is that you need to apply this list of topics to your scenario. So, whether it's a plumber's or a shoe shop or whatever, and remember, this is the amazing way to keep track on our chief examiner. We can always identify what he's been up to by what we find in the context for this question. You will be amused by the one you see, because I like to imagine our chief examiner doing the activity that you will find out about in tomorrow's paper. Regardless what the activity is, though, and what the context of the question is, you need to think about the system that's being proposed and talk about each of these points. So, for instance, the interface. The interface, whether it's command line or text-based or a GUI, graphics and buttons and things, which one is best for the business and why? So you might say something like, well, in the happy holes, I think a GUI would be better because buttons and icons would be easier to use, and our system is being used by people that are less technically knowledgeable. So it would be a sentence like that that justifies the reason why you think that is the correct version of that bullet point. Again, you don't get this list of bullet points in the exam. You have to learn it and then apply it to the scenario you're given. It isn't good enough, unfortunately, just to say, oh, there are 2 types of user interface, CLI and GUI. These are. You need to say which one you want to use for this project and why. Data structures, then, how we're going to store our data. Arrays are quick to access. They're lists that live in RAM, but files are slower to access, but will stay in the computer once the power goes off. I mean, the honest answer is that you probably use a combination of both, but when you're given the choice between them, and especially for our scenarios, the most likely one is a file, because whilst it might be slower to load, you do want to save this information long term. File handling is our next one, serial or random. When we're saving to a file, do we save it in the order that we've added the data? So, for instance, happy holes, a serial file on happy holes would mean that the first holiday I added would be at the top of the file, and the most recent holiday I added would be at the bottom of the file. If I've been doing that for 20 years, that file is gigabytes in size, and it might take me ages to get to the bottom of it, even with a computer. Random means that the data will be stored in a random sort of order with some kind of method of finding the data reasonably quickly. But the problem with that is that it's harder to sort that data. It requires more processing. So, I mean, 90% of the time, a serial file would be fine because the jobs are in order of the date that they were stored. And that makes it very easy to find the most recent jobs because they're at the bottom of the file anyway. In most cases, that would be perfectly fine. Validation. Now, of course, you've talked about validation a little bit. You'd mentioned which kinds you think are worthwhile using and why. Local or global variables. In this case, this is the names of your variables. A global variable could be accessed from the entire program, and a local variable can only be accessed from the subroutine or the structure that it exists within. And what this really means is if you start a variable like I within a for loop, or you start a counter in a while loop, and you make them in the while loop, that doesn't exist once the while loop's over. And that allows you to reuse variable names, which is brilliant. So 99% of the time, the answer to that bullet point is local variables. And why? Because you get to reuse the names of the variables in different parts of the program. Finally, the ability of the program to handle different data types. Again, in the previous question, you had listed a bunch of data types in your data tables. So you'd bring those up and you'd say what kind of types they need to be able to process and why. A variety would be good. Okay, the last question you'll get on the practical half of the paper is flowcharts. In this case, I've given you a nice question on reading flowcharts. So you do not need, and I'll say this again, you do not need to go and memorize the flowchart for saving data searching data from a file. That's the one that existed in those first three papers. The flowchart question was exactly the same. I've been nice to you, and I'm giving you a question that is specifically about reading and interpreting a flowchart. Just to remind you of what the symbols mean, we read the flowchart starting at the start or the begin terminator, and we go until the end terminator. The rectangular boxes are processes. They are things that are happening or things that are being worked out. Decisions have multiple arrows coming off them with what those decisions are about. And we also have subroutines, which are in these pink boxes here. Again, the colors mean nothing. They're just a way to identify them. It's the shape that's important. A subroutine is another diagram, really, that exists somewhere else. And the parallelogram is the most important one because it is output and input. It is taking data in and putting data on the screen. Both of those things are brilliant to be able to do that with a flowchart. Your job will be following the flowchart and working through it with different bits of data. So it might say, here's a program that calculates the cost of a holiday. Find out what the cost of a holiday would be if I pick this, this, and this. And your job then would be following that flowchart through to work out what the output would be at the end. These questions, when they're about reading a flowchart, tend to be quite straightforward. But again, you've never seen one before. So be aware of what the symbols look like, be aware of what they mean, and try your very best with it. That's the end of the practical questions. So we'll take a little pause there. And if anybody's got any questions that they want to put in the chat about the practical section, please do. But you will have the practical section as the first part of your paper, and it shouldn't take you that long to complete those sections. I can't see any questions popping up. If you do have a question, please pop it in the chat and we'll have a look at it. But there's no coding. It's all handwritten stuff so far. Okay, I'm assuming everyone's good with that. So let's move on to the practical part. I hope, by the way, that your exams are going all right. I haven't seen many of you this week, probably because you've been stuck away in the exams hall, beavering away at the work. Okay, these are the theory topics that you will have in your mock. The first one is reading pseudocode. What pseudocode, you might ask? Well, pseudocode you've seen before because it is the fake programming language that you need to be able to read. Now, importantly, you do not need to be able to write it. This is because in Wales, we are allowed to write programming questions in any programming language that we like. In our case, it would be beneficial to write any questions about programming in Python. But spoilers, we are not having any questions about writing code for a program. So, happy days. That's what I say. The next thing that you need to be able to do then is to read this code there on the right-hand side of the screen. It is quite self-explanatory, and the indents do matter, and it isn't real code at all. But you would have to read that code, interpret it, and then tell us what the outputs are when A is a certain value in this case. So let's read the code and see if we can interpret it. Let me get my pen on. So the code says this: A is an integer. An integer is whole. It's a whole number. Quick question popped up. Sorry. No writing code, but they will be writing with a pen. A is an integer. A is a whole number. Okay. B is an integer. B is a whole number. Okay. Start main prog. What could that mean? Scratch your head. Oh, start main program. Of course it is. That's exactly what it is. And the main program is this stuff. We're going to input A. So we're going to take A in from the user and let them type in. We're then going to set B to the number 3. So B is going to start as the value 3. And then we've got this. This kind of loop is a bit weird. This is a do until loop. So we keep repeating the code until this is true. So we do the code, we check that. If it's true, we escape. We go down to here, where it's just outputting A. So we need to set C to A plus B, output C, and then set A to C. All right, so it makes some sort of sense. We'll work our way through it. I'll just pick this one up. What were the shapes again? The best thing to do would be to watch the VOD of this, or if you go to my YouTube channel, that'll be up there straight away at the end of this session for you. So you can flick through and you can pause it. I'll also make a PDF copy of these slides available to you all at the end of the session on Google Classroom if you want to do any revision from that. And again, I apologize that it's quite late in the day, but I did have something to do leading up to 9 o'clock. Otherwise, I would have done it a bit earlier for you. Right, let's try this out. Let's start where A is 4. Now I'm going to make a little table here so I know what's going on. A and B are my values. I've got C as well that I need to keep track of because you can see that here. And I also want to see what my outputs are. So I'd make my little table like that just to make my life easier. So let's start the program. Input A. Well, A was 4. B equals 3. Okay, let's make B 3. Do. So we're repeating this for a while. Set C to A plus B. So C is going to be A plus B, which is 7. Output C. Okay. Set A equals C. Okay, so A becomes C. So I'll move on to my next line down now because I'm changing A. So A becomes what C was. Okay. Loop until A is greater than 10. Is A greater than 10? No, it's 7. So we start again. Next line. C equals A plus B. So C is going to be 7 plus 3. So that's going to be 10. Output C. Set A equals C. So I'll move down to the next line now because I'm changing A. Then I ask the question, is A greater than 10? No, A is 10. So we're not going to move on. We're going to go back up to the top of the loop. C equals A plus B. So that's going to be 10 plus 3, which is 13. Output C, 13. A becomes C, so A is 13. And is A greater than 10? Well, now it is. So we get out the loop and we do this. Output A. A is 13. So this list of outputs here is what I would write down as my answer. In this table form, I would be able to mark that and get the marks for it absolutely fine. It's really clear what the outputs are, and it's really clear what order they're happening in. But the important thing is to read the code, try and interpret what it's asking you to do, and work your way through it with the data suggested to get the outputs that you want. Okay, next one, binary addition, and floating point. So let's have a look at this. And I'm going to do a demo. And this is where you get to see my exciting top-down camera. Ta-da! I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, sir, why did you set a camera up? It's a bit too dark. Can't really see it. Yeah, I haven't got a light box. You know, if you want to get me to the point where I'm monetized or I've got affiliate status, maybe I can get a softbox and have a bit more light on it. But we'll do what we can from here today. And what I'm going to do very quickly, whilst I'm talking to you on this, is I'm going to just double check that the mock has the questions that I thought I put in it. And it does. Great. So your first job will be converting hex to binary. So in that case, if I have a hex value, for instance, if I have 7e, and I want to convert that to binary, the easy way is we take each of the bits and we treat them separately. Now, it's really important I do that because each bit is worth 1 nibble, which is in binary. And that's why it's so important, because each bit is worth 1 nibble. So what I need to do is I need to represent 7 on this side. So 1, 2, 4, 8. And it's not 2's complement, so they're just the standard place values. And this side, 1, 2, 4, 8. I'm going to represent E. Now, what is E? Let's work it out. A is 10. B is 11. C is 12. D is 13. So E is 14. It's always worth writing that down along the side, because really what you want to do is not leave it up to your memory to remember what these values were. You want to look them up. So 7 is going to be 4, 2, and 1. E, or 14, is going to be 8 and 4 and 2. How do we convert it to binary then? Well, we just glue them back together. 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0. That is the same as that. They are the same value, but it's really, really easy to convert from hex to binary, simply because of how that works. Your next job then will be adding 2 binary values together. So let's take a recap of what that was like. There'll be 2 8-bit values, so I'm going to make some up. We'll add these together. Now, just like in normal arithmetic, we're going from right to left, and you need to remember the cheat numbers we need. The only values that you care about are 0, 1, 2, and 3. So in binary, 0 is 0, 1 is 1, 2 is 1, 0, and 3 is 1, 1. All of those values are going to be useful to us, and the biggest number we'll see is 3. Again, worth writing them down in the corner, simply because you are going to be doing this quickly and you may make a mistake. So we'll start at the right-hand side. 1 plus 1 is 2. I can't write 2 down because it doesn't fit. 2 is 1, 0. So I put down the 0 and I carry the 1. You always carry the most significant value, which is the left-hand side. So now my next column, 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2, so that's 0, carry the 1. 1 plus 0 plus 1 is 2, so that's 0, carry the 1. Lots of carries in this one. 0 plus 1 is 2, so that's 0, carry the 1. Now it gets interesting. A 1, and a 1 is 3, so that's 1, 1. So it's 1, carry the 1. 0, 0, and 1 is 1, and 1 and 0 is 1. So there's our answer. The only thing that could get interesting is if you have a situation like this. This is going to cause us a problem. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. 1 and 1 is 2, so it's 0, carry the 1. And in normal maths, we just write that down here. Now, in a computer system, this is a circuit. They are physical flip-flops, chips that store each of those values. If the number gets bigger, in this case, I need 9 bits, but I've only got 8 bits to store it in. This number is lost, and we call that an overflow. That's the only complicated thing that could happen with these values. How about our good friend mantissa and exponent then? Well, mantissa and exponent will tell you how many bits are in each side, if they're in 2's complementation or whatever. Okay. Now, let's try and work out. Let's have a look. Let's do an 8 and a 4. So an 8-bit mantissa and a 4-bit exponent. There we go. And our exponent will be. Okay, I have no idea what this is yet. We'll work it out. I'm just trying not to find a question that's going to confuse us. So if I need to convert that back to denary, what I need to do is work out what these things are worth first. So I need to know what that's worth. That is 1, 2, 4, and minus 8. Remember, if it's in 2's complementation, what that means is the most significant value is the negative version of itself. So that means I'm going plus 6, which is plus 6 in this direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's rewrite that. So I've got 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0.0. Let's see what that's worth. Should be quite straightforward. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. But remember, it's 2's complementation, so that's minus 64. So we're talking about 34 plus 8. So that is what? 42. So that's how we represent 42. The other way around, remember, is a little bit more complicated. If I need to represent, let's try 4 let's see, 4.25. Yep, if I need to represent that in floating point, how do we do it? Right, quick question popped up. If the exponent is 1, let me just do this as a separate one up here. If the exponent is 1, 1, 1, 0, yep, that would end up being this. So you have 1, 2, 4, and minus 8. So I would do this, minus 8 plus 4 plus 2. Just work that sum out. Minus 8 plus 4 is minus 4, plus 2 is minus 2 overall. That's what the answer is to that. You will not need to do negative representation in the exam because, shockingly, the mark scheme for the question you've got is embarrassing, and there are some incorrect assumptions in it from the language that they're using. But I will be quite flexible on marking this. I want to see you doing it. Anyway, let's go back. What did we say we're going to do? 4.25. So we want to make 4.25 with an 8-bit exponent and a 4-bit, sorry, an 8-bit mantissa and a 4-bit exponent. So let's start by representing that in fixed point binary. The easiest way to do this, of course, is that we get our point and we go a couple of places in each direction just so we can start identifying what the value is going to be. So 1, 2, 4. Well, that should be enough to represent 4. This way, a half, a quarter, an eighth. Actually, 0.25 is a quarter, isn't it? So 0.25 is that. This side needs 4, so it's that. Now that's positive representation. That's signed. So that's unsigned at the moment. Because the answers will be positive, we don't need to worry too much about it. And just then to answer this question, no, there will be no negative numbers needed for the assessment tomorrow. So don't worry about that. Okay. What we need to do then is we need to work out, well, where does the binary point need to go? And remember, in a positive value, it needs to end up being 0.1 something. So that means that our point needs to go 1, 2, 3. So we need to represent in our exponent in 4 bits, 3, positive 3. So let's see what that is. That's 1, 2, 4, and minus 8. Remember, it's 2's complementation, so this side is always the negative version of itself. And then we're saying 3 in that, so that's a 2 and a 1. Nope, nope. We've got our exponent. Now, our mantissa then needs to be rewritten in 8 bits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines there. So we do 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. And then any blanks at the end, we just fill in with 0. Copy down our exponent. And there's your answer. If you really want to, put your point in there. That's not how it would be stored in a computer system. Hopefully, that's okay to you. The only thing I will leave you thinking about is this. If I have a signed or an unsigned way of representing data. Unsigned means it's just bog standard binary. Yeah. So the exponent wouldn't be in 2's complement. It would be 1, 2, 4, 8 in a 4-bit exponent, right? Signed would mean that I have 2's complementation. So 1, 2, 4, minus 8. There's a difference in what you can represent with those two values. Have a think about this as a hint to what might appear. If I did conversion in floating point arithmetic, and I told you that the mantissa and the exponent were unsigned, so the most significant value in both places was a positive value, what would be the maximum minimum you think I could show with that? And similarly, with signed, which is what we're used to using, what would be the maximum and minimum values I could store? With that, we have talked about this at length over the last few lessons, almost as if I was giving you a big hint to what the question might be, because 2019 was a non-standard question in the world of floating point arithmetic. Right. Well, that doesn't freak you out a bit. I don't know what will, but try your best. There are questions for marks as you go. There are questions for, there are marks for partially complete answers. So do not leave that blank, please. Okay, on to the next things. There's not much left to go now, and time's ticking away. Systems analysis, the investigation. Well, this question is going to be about what an investigation is. And you remember, hopefully, that the investigation, the point of the investigation is that it is dealing with how do you, as a systems analyst, work out what the company currently does. And one of the key things that you'd need to think about there would be observations. So we could go into the business and we could watch people do their jobs, take notes about it and keep an eye on them and get an idea about what all the job roles in the company are like. Now, there are some advantages to that. The first one is that I'd probably spot things that were not immediately obvious. Okay. Me going in and watching somebody do their job, I would pick up on things that they don't think about because they've done it so often and for so many years that it's just internal. But me being fresh eyes in the room, I would see that. So I'd be able to make a note of that, which may not normally be picked up. The second thing is confirming that information gathering through different fact-finding methods is correct. So what that translates to is if I've used any of the other techniques, the observation can let me double check. So if I've done a questionnaire and something weird's come up, I can go, no, that's fine. That's all okay. That's good there. Disadvantages, though. Some people will feel a bit threatened and awkward whilst you're following them around taking notes. It's a bit like being on The Apprentice, I'd imagine. If you're sat there and somebody's following you around taking notes and tutting or rolling their eyes, I would feel a bit awkward about that entire process. In fact, I'm sure very soon you may be in a lesson observation where I've got somebody in watching me teach, and it is a bit awkward doing that sort of thing. The second thing on there is some of the subtler parts you might miss. So there might be things that don't happen very often or happen in times when you're not observing them. I'll give you some examples. A lot of the decisions and the conversations we have as teachers in our department happen when we're having lunch in the office. We don't have a formal meeting about it. We don't sit down and make a big deal of it. We have a quick conversation when we've got a mouthful of sandwich and we're sipping on a can of Red Bull. Don't drink Red Bull, it's bad for you. But, we're sipping on a glass of water And we're chatting about it, and we make decisions. And this is a very subtle way of doing it because it's a real strange thing that you do parts of your job in times when people wouldn't think you did. And there are loads of things we like. Oftentimes I'll arrange to do something quite complicated over text in the evening or over the weekend. That wouldn't be observed by somebody doing this job because they wouldn't be there at those points. Okay, questionnaires. Questionnaires are, you know what a questionnaire is. I'm sure you're doing them at the moment for your Welsh back. In fact, I think I've got a few people's questionnaires sat in my inbox ready for me to answer. I will try, I promise. But your questionnaire is very simple to do. You stick a load of questions in and send it off. But they are hard to create and design properly. Because if you ask a question like, is Mr. Morgan the most amazing teacher you've ever seen? Or is he just the best teacher you've ever seen? And there are 2 tick boxes. Well, either way there, I'm getting a good review. It is a weird thing to do to build questionnaires because you have to build them as open-ended as possible. But the more open-ended you build them, the harder they are to collect the data from. Also, how many questionnaires have you had, especially sent from year 11 in the recent few weeks, that you've just gone, and rolled your eyes out and not done? Most questionnaires are left incomplete, and that leads to incomplete data. Good things, though, we can give them to hundreds or thousands of people at once, and it gives us a large number of different opinions. Document collection sounds boring, is actually quite interesting. You pick up and you get copies of all the documents people use to do their jobs. What forms do they fill in? What websites do they go and tap data into? What paper do they actually use? And it gives you a good understanding of how the business works to follow the trail of documentation, to see how it goes from one era to another, to see what people fill in and what people do with it. And the advantage of that is it's really reliable way of knowing what has to be done in the business, because paperwork wouldn't exist unless we wanted people to do it. And we also help us support our picture of the business that we've already got from the other areas. Now, the negatives are documentation is a limited view. They don't tell us how they were created or why. And there are certain teachers in our school that like a bit of paperwork and that rather than doing something simple, do something complicated. So there's a load of sheets and bits of paperwork that I have to fill in day to day that are much, much more complicated than I'd like, because the person creating them likes them to be complicated, not because they need to be. So you wouldn't see that. You wouldn't understand that when you were looking at the documents. There's also sensitive information in those documents that you may not want people seeing. So some of the most important documents in the business might be missing from what I'm looking at. The final one, of course, is interviews, where I sit down and talk to the people one-on-one. It's great because we can get a large amount of information really quickly. You can really hone in on what's going on. And you get detailed responses. You get people really talking about what they do day to day and how their jobs work. And you can really unpick them, ask them follow-up questions, and get a lot of detail. But they are very time consuming. If there are thousands of people employed in a business, you wouldn't have the time to do interviews for all of them. Interviewees also may not be very truthful. They may not understand why you're doing it, and therefore might be trying to make their job sound bigger or better. It is a common thing. You don't want to go away from this entire process with an unrealistic idea of what people are doing. Nearly there. Truth tables for logic. So let's remind us of the types of gates. You've got your not gate. It's the line above the symbol. That means that we get the opposite out of the input. So if the input is 0 or off, we get a 1. If it's sorry, my computer's having a bit of a bad day. And if it's a positive input, we get a negative output. It flips it. Then we've got our AND gate. We've got 2 inputs this time. Both of them need to be on to get the AND working out of it. And you'll see there that the symbol they've picked for that is a dot. So A dot B is A and B. Both need to be on or 1 to get an on signal or 1 out of it. The OR gate, this works by having either of the inputs turned on and we'll get a 1 out of it. It also, weirdly, means that if both of them are turned on, we get a 1 out of it. And you'll remember this is where it started to get a little confusing, because this is where they decided that the plus symbol meant OR. Cracking decision, guys, because that's not confusing at all, is it? So when you see the plus symbol, remember, that means OR. The final one, XOR, Some of you have said Xor because you feel like a science fiction nerd when you say it, but it stands for exclusive OR. And you might be thinking again, why is it not an Xor Gate? And that's because the Xor is the sound a donkey makes. So we are cool in computer science, so we'll use that X and make it an XOR gate. An XOR gate is different in that it only gives you a 1 if only one of the inputs is on. So if both the inputs are off, we get an off. If both the inputs are on, we get it off. And this exists in the real world. This is the sort of light you get on your stairs. There's one at the bottom, there's one at the top. If they're both in the same position, the light's off. And if one of them is on, the light's on. You will need it to create this. And you remember the way in which you do this example question is you work your way down. Let me get my pen on. In this case, A or C must be a 1 for me to put a 1 in this box. A or C are both zeros. I get a 0. There's zeros here. We've got 1, 1. We've got a 1. We've got a 1, a 1. Ones everywhere for these two. Then we do our next column, B and C. So I'm looking at these two columns. Both B and C need to be a 1 to get a 1 out of it. So I've got 2 zeros. I've got at least 1 0, 2 zeros, 1 0, 1 0. 2 ones. So I get a 1, 1 0, 2 ones. Lovely. Now, this is where people start freaking out, but this is very, very simple. This bit is that column. This bit is that column. So what I'm really doing is XORing these two. XOR, you remember. Oh, I thought I'd done it wrong then, but apparently the chat's corrected itself. This one, the XOR, is only a 1 if only one of the inputs is 1. So when they're both the same, we're going to get a 0 out of it. So they're both the same. They're both the same. They're different. We get a 1. They're different. They're different. They're the same. They're different. They're the same. And then finally, the bit in brackets is this entire column. So this is the easy step. Not. It's the opposite. So we just run down, putting the opposite number in to what was on the left-hand side. The key to this, by the way, is taking your time. Okay? You need to take your time, do a column at the time, and make sure you are looking in the right columns. Please feel free to put your hand over the columns that you're not looking at as you go. It should be a reasonably easy question for you to complete. There's nothing tricky about it. It is literally column, column, spot which column is which, and what symbol we're using. If you've remembered the 4 symbols and you've remembered what they do to logic, you'll be absolutely fine. Okay, final one, Data Protection Act. I said to you laws, specifically the law we're keeping. I'm going to come back, hold on a second. Sorry, because Ben has asked a question. What does the XOR mean? I'll jump back a little bit just to recap that, if I can. The XOR gate, that one there, is exclusive OR. If the inputs are the same, we get an off. If the inputs are different, we get an on. Okay, so if you look at the way the truth table works there, when they're both off, we get an off. When they're both on, we get an off. But if only one of them is turned on, we get an on symbol. So XOR is the weird one. Yep, you do need to know XOR for tomorrow's test. The final one, sorry, is the Data Protection Act. I said the laws, specifically the Data Protection Act. Go and have a look at the Data Protection Act. Go and Google it tonight. Have a read of it tomorrow as you're walking in. Because the question could have been about all the laws, but it's specifically about the Data Protection Act. The Data Protection Act, the traditional version has 8 principles. The modern version has 7 principles. These are the different things that the Data Protection Act protects. On a very general level, the Data Protection Act's job is to ensure that you have rights over data that is stored on you by companies. So you have the right to look at and inspect data that's held on you by a company. You have the right to have your data changed if it's wrong. You have the right to delete data if you don't want it there. You have the right to have your data stored in a secure way. You have the right to have your data dealt with and processed fairly and lawfully. You have the right to have your data only stored as long as is necessary. You have the right to only give them data that's relevant for their needs. So You know, if you wander into Starbucks and they ask you for your inside leg measurement, you don't give it to them because they've got no legal reason to ask for that sort of thing. There's also some rules in there that mean that we can't send that data outside of the EU, or at least you can't without permission, and that you can't resell the data to another company without permission, which is why you always get uh, in any form you sign up for a little tick box that says something like, tick this box if you want to receive marketing email. Because if you tick it, that's them getting the permission to sell your address on to other people. The principles of the Data Protection Act, somebody's asked about. I can send you that, but literally, you Google Principles of the Data Protection Act, you will find it. Okay, go and have a quick look. It's going to take you 2-3 seconds to do that in Google and find the page for yourself. In fact, do you know what? I'll do that now. Principles of Data Protection Act is the first suggestion from Google, and let's see if I can get them in a nice, easy way for you. Let's have a look. Where do I normally get it from? I normally get it from the ICO. Right. I shall pop this in the chat. You can do what you want with it. This is the modern version and talks about multiple things. I will just pop that over there and bring that up on the screen. So these are the principles of the Data Protection Act. You don't need to know these word for word. This is sort of legalese for it. Okay. The things you care about are these. Okay. Our UK law means that we must process data lawfully, in a fair way and transparently. So that means that I can't just do what I want with the data. I have to be honest and open with it, what I'm going to do with it and why. Purpose limitation means I'm only allowed to use it for what I've said I'm going to use it for. We as a school, for instance, can't sell your data to a company to advertise things to you because we've said that we won't do that. We've said that we use your data for exam purposes only. Okay, data minimization, I should be collecting the least amount of data about you. And if I'm collecting unnecessary data, I'm going to be fined for it. Accuracy should be correct. Storage limitation, that's things like I should only store it for a certain amount of years, which is fine, isn't it? Because if you joined the Dennis the Menace fan club, or, you know, you'd hope that your Club Penguin account had been cancelled by now. Some of you may still be using it. I say that Club Penguin's been closed down, hasn't it? Yes, I think Evan was most disappointed, as far as I remember. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure he was very disappointed at the time. Integrity and confidentiality is storing that data in a secure way. And then accountability is that I am accountable for that data as a business. If I store your data and it is hacked, the business is the organization that's responsible for that and can be fined a very, very large amount of money. So all that stuff are the key principles of the Data Protection Act and the things you need to know about. We've not done too bad tonight, considering we didn't start until about 5 past. We've done 50 minutes and we've actually covered all the topics in the mock. So I will finish up by saying good luck to you all for tomorrow. If you've got any more questions, I'll hang around in the chat for a few minutes at the end of this live stream, so I won't be finishing up just yet. If you do have any questions that you haven't asked yet, please pop them in the chat now, and I'll deal with them before the end of the live stream so you can grab them. But you should do fine. As I've said to you before, I am not expecting you to absolutely smash this. I want you to have the experience of doing an exam in the right conditions with questions you may not have seen before, based on the revision that you have done. And that way, we can take apart whether that revision was effective and whether you know what's going on. Let's have a look at a few questions then. Please steal my data. Oh, if you ask me to do it, it's not a breach of the Data Protection Act, unfortunately. Okay. Here's a question about the detail. Do we need to know all the principles? You don't need to know them off by heart, but you do need to have a good idea of the parts of it, because the question is only about the Data Protection Act. So you can imagine that if they're going for, say, a 6 to 8 marks of the question, you might want to know the vast majority of them to be able to talk about them in a very general way. You don't need to be able to repeat back the legalese to me, but you would need to say something like, the business is responsible for making sure the data is stored securely. You would need to say it a bit more like that. Are you in the sports hall for the exam? As far as I'm aware, you are. You were booked into the sports hall for the exam. That's where everyone else is for that session. And it is an entirely written paper. Special points for anyone that spots my comedy gold added to the paper. And especially, please do take note of the instructions on the front of the paper. I will be enforcing them. Thank you. I will put that on my teaching award. Not that I've got a teaching award. Remember, you can nominate me for the Pearson Teaching Award if you want to. There's every year, you know, best teacher. Does special live streams for us. Where's his Flash Gordon t-shirt while he does it? Look at that. Beautiful. Yeah, fantastic. Data dictionaries was the question here. The data dictionaries, I'll jump back if I can a bunch of slides. Let me discard the annotation there. The data dictionaries was this thing. Hopefully you remember that. That is where you take your design for a table and you expand it to explain what that would look like. That's the data dictionary. Again, if you've missed anything, please go watch the VOD, which will be available straight away after this. Or if you go on my YouTube channel, it'll be available as a post on there in a few minutes. Hopefully, data protection question, how many marks would it be? Normally between 6 and 8, because there are 8. Well, there are 7 to 8 principles, depending upon which version you're looking at. The modern version, 7 principles, so I can imagine a question would be about 6 marks in a normal manner. But some of those marks would be for talking about what the Data Protection Act is and what the point of it is. It wouldn't all just be for going through the different parts of it. Okay. Okay, I think that's it in terms of the questions then. So I am going to say goodbye to you now. Please go and do a bit of revision. Don't stay up too late at all. I'd much rather you all be nice and awake and prepared for tomorrow's assessment. Thank you very much for joining me for the live stream, and I really appreciate the fact that you all tuned in so late. There's one more question. Will we get the table for the Logic Gate question? Yeah, Logic Gate question. You basically just get the table itself with the columns already done for you. You just have to work them out. At A2, they won't give you the table, but at AS, they do. Right. Thank you very much all for coming. Again, I do appreciate you turning up because I know this is well past school time. I hope it was helpful. Let's absolutely smash that exam tomorrow. I believe in you all, and you can all do really, really well. Okay? Have a nice evening.